Leaving the wrong relationship hurts. Leaving the right relationship too soon can change the course of your entire life. Most people spend months asking whether they should leave, but almost nobody asks themselves some questions that I think actually bring clarity. If you leave without understanding what's really broken in this relationship, you might spend years searching for a different relationship only to find yourself living the same painful patterns with someone new. Sometimes what follows you isn't your partner. It's the version of you that never got the opportunity to heal. Have you ever reached the point where you looked at your partner and you thought, I don't know if I can do this anymore? And not because of one huge betrayal, not because of one terrible argument, but just because you're exhausted. You're exhausted from having the same conversations. You're exhausted from feeling lonely, exhausted from wondering if things are ever going to change. When people get to that place, they usually ask themselves one question, which is, should I stay or should I go? And it feels like an obvious question, but after years of working with individuals and couples, I've learned something different. That question rarely brings any sort of clarity because it keeps your focus on this relationship instead of helping you understand what's actually happening inside the relationship. Now, I've watched people leave relationships that probably could have been healed. They could have worked through it. I've also watched people stay in relationships that were deeply unhealthy. And that's what we call stabilized misery. But the difference wasn't how much they loved each other. The difference was whether they understood what was actually broken. And sometimes the relationship is the problem, but sometimes the patterns are the problem. And if you don't know the difference, you can spend years changing partners while unknowingly repeating the same relationship. And that's why I believe there's 3 questions that every person should ask themselves before deciding to leave. Because those questions have the power to bring a level of clarity that emotion alone never will. If we've never met, I'm Jenn Pinkerton. I'm a psychotherapist and connection expert. And today we're going to talk about 3 questions that I believe every person should ask themselves before deciding to leave a relationship. Now, it's not going to tell you whether you should stay or go, but it will help you make a healthier decision instead of an emotional one. Here's your first one. Have I truly done everything I can to bring the healthiest version of this relationship? Now, notice what I didn't ask. I didn't say, am I happy? Because happiness changes. I didn't ask, do I still love them? Because love isn't static. And I didn't ask, are they making me happy? Because no one person can carry the responsibility of creating your happiness. Instead, I want you to ask something much more difficult. Have I truly shown up as the healthiest version of myself in this relationship? Have I communicated honestly? Or have I expected my partner to read my mind? Have I brought up problems when they were small? Or have I waited until resentment was already overflowing? Have I been curious? Or have I spent more time trying to prove my point that I'm right? Have I worked on my own attachment wounds or my trauma? Or have I expected my partner to heal them all for me? Have I taken responsibility for the ways I've contributed to the distance between us? See, all those are really uncomfortable questions, but they're powerful. Because a big mistake that people make is assuming that changing partners automatically changes patterns, but it doesn't. If your conflict style is unhealthy, that conflict style is going to follow you. If you avoid vulnerability, that avoidance will show up the next time. If your nervous system struggles with trust, that struggle will follow you too. So changing relationships doesn't actually solve these issues. It doesn't automatically change the relational health. So that's why I want people to stop asking, how do I know if they're the problem? And start asking, have I been participating in what's happening between us. Now, let me be very clear. This is not about blaming yourself. That's not what I want you to do. It's about empowering yourself. It's because you can only change the part that belongs to you. You cannot force your partner to grow. You cannot make them change. You can't make them communicate. You can't make them become emotionally safe. But you can honestly ask yourself whether you've done the work that healthy love requires. And it's a requirement for both people. So you have to look at yourself. A really freeing moment in therapy is when someone can say, I know I showed up with integrity in this relationship. That's whether they stay or whether they leave. They know they didn't just walk away because things became difficult. They walked away because they had clarity. And clarity is very different from emotional exhaustion. Now, before I go any further to the next questions, I want to ask you something now. If you're trying to decide whether to stay or leave, how healthy are you relationally? Not your partner, not your marriage, but you. And that's exactly why I created the Pinkerton Relational Health Index, or the PRHI. It's a free assessment that is designed to help you better understand your relational health, how you're showing up, your communication patterns, your emotional safety, your attachment tendencies and styles, your conflict style, your boundaries or lack thereof, intimacy, and the habits you bring into every relationship. Because the healthiest relationships come from self-awareness. So you can find the link below in the description, and I think you'll learn something about yourself that may bring more clarity that you've had in a very long time. So now question 2. I want you to ask yourself, am I trying to solve the real problem or just the loudest one? Because a big mistake that I see people make before leaving a relationship is assuming they know what's actually broken, what the problem is. They'll tell me we fight all the time. We never have sex anymore. We don't communicate. We're like roommates. Those are very real problems, but they are rarely, if ever, the first problem. They're usually the symptom of something much deeper. So think about it this way. When someone has a fever, a doctor doesn't spend all their time treating the fever. They're asking what is causing the fever, right? Relationships deserve the same kind of curiosity and the same depth, because arguments are rarely about the dishes. Distance is rarely about not having a hug or a kiss. Sex is rarely about sex. Communication is not ever just about words. There is always something underneath. And maybe the real problem is emotional safety. Or maybe the real issue is years of resentment that were never repaired. Or maybe one person stopped feeling emotionally chosen. Maybe neither person has ever felt understood. Maybe you're both protecting yourself so much that neither of you feels safe enough to be vulnerable anymore. And those are very different problems than we argue too much. Another question that I encourage couples to ask is, if this problem magically disappeared tomorrow, would we actually feel so deeply connected again? Let's say the argument stopped. Would you suddenly feel emotionally close and everything in this relationship was amazing? Or if sex improved tomorrow, would you trust that everything comes back with that? Or if your partner suddenly started helping around the house and sharing the emotional load, would the loneliness disappear? Now, sometimes the answer is yes, but most of the time the answer is no, because you've been trying to solve the loudest problem instead of the deepest one. So that's why I encourage people to become investigators instead of judges. Instead of asking who is causing this, whose fault is this, ask, what is this relationship trying to tell us? And that question changes everything, because now you're no longer standing across from your partner. You're standing beside your partner. Y'all are together, looking together at this problem in a united way. And that's a very different posture to have relationally. One creates blame, the other creates teamwork. One is individualistic, the other is relational. So I also want to say something important. Sometimes you do identify the real problem, but your partner may have no interest in working on it. They refuse therapy. They refuse accountability. They refuse repair. They refuse growth. They might even refuse a vulnerable conversation. And that is very important information too, because a healthy relationship doesn't require two perfect people. Not at all. It doesn't exist. But it does require two people who are willing to do the work. And if one person is carrying all the emotional labor while the other refuses to participate, that's not something you can fix by yourself. Which brings us to what I believe is the final question every person needs to ask before deciding whether to stay or go. Because understanding yourself is important, and understanding the real problem is important. But neither of those matter if only one person is willing to build something different. Now we're at question 3. Are we both willing to build this relationship? Now, there's one truth I wish every person understood before they made the decision to stay or go. Healthy relationships are never built by one healthy person. They're built by two people who are both willing to grow. Notice I didn't say perfect. I didn't even say healed. I didn't say emotionally mature all the time. I said willing, because willingness changes everything. And I've worked with couples who had experienced betrayal, deep infidelity, or many years of resentment, addiction, a painful distance, poor financial decisions, painful arguments. But the pain, this wasn't the whole crux of it. The people were willing to do the work, so it changed. I've also seen couples have, something much smaller on paper, but the relationship couldn't move forward. Not because the issue was too big, but because one or both people weren't willing to grow. And that is a different situation. That's a different problem. So before you decide to leave, I want you to ask yourself, when I invite my partner into growth, what happens? Do they lean in and become curious? Do they reflect? Do they take responsibility? Do they say, help me understand your experience? Or I see how I hurt you, or let's figure this out together. Or do they shut the conversation down? Do they dismiss your concerns? Do they blame you? Do they tell you you're too sensitive? Do they refuse counseling? Do they refuse to even have the conversation? Because here's the reality. You can survive a lot in a relationship. You can survive conflict. You can survive disappointment. You can survive painful seasons. What becomes incredibly difficult to survive is carrying the entire relationship by yourself. And a healthy relationship requires two people moving toward each other. Not one person doing all the emotional work while the other person just simply waits for things to get better. Now, I also want to speak to those of you who immediately take responsibility for everything. If you're someone who naturally asks, what could I have done differently? Be careful. Be careful not to hear today's conversation as permission to carry responsibility that doesn't belong to you. Self-reflection is healthy. Self-blame is not. There comes a point where you've communicated, where you've grown, where you've apologized, where you've become curious. You've gone to great lengths. You've gone to therapy. You've invited your partner into therapy. You've invited them to do the work with you. And if they're still unwilling, that tells you something important. Not about your worth, but about the relationship's capacity to become healthier. A heartbreaking thing that I see is someone staying for years because they keep hoping their partner will eventually become someone they've repeatedly shown that they're unwilling to become. Now, hope is beautiful, but hope without evidence can keep us stuck. Healthy relationships aren't built on potential. They are built on participation. And that's the question I want to leave you with now. Not do I love them? Not are they a good person? But are we both willing to keep building this relationship together? Because if the answer is yes, there is often tremendous hope. If the answer is no, that clarity matters too. And sometimes clarity is the greatest gift you can give yourself before making one of the biggest decisions of your life. If today's conversation resonated with you, or it helped you realize that you're standing at a crossroads, you're at this fork in the road in your life and in your relationship, I want you to know you don't have to figure that out alone. That is exactly why I have my Relationship Blueprint Intensive. It's a transformational program, and whether you're coming individually or as a couple, we will work together to understand your relationship patterns, improve your emotional safety, strengthen communication, navigate conflict, rebuild trust, and gain clarity about the healthiest path forward. Because the goal isn't simply to save a relationship. The goal is to create a relationship that's healthy enough to thrive. And if you're ready to do that work, you can learn more about this at jennpinkerton.com. So before you leave a relationship, don't just ask whether it's over. Ask whether it's been fully explored. Ask whether you've shown up with honesty, with courage, with accountability. Ask whether you've been trying to solve the real problem. And ask whether both of you are still willing to build something healthier together. Because sometimes the bravest decision is leaving. Sometimes the bravest decision is staying. But the wisest decision is the one you make with clarity instead of exhaustion. If today's conversation made you realize that healthy relationships aren't built by accident, then the next question becomes this: why is dating so hard today? So in the next video, we're going to talk about why so many good people struggle to find lasting love and why the problem may not be what you think it is. Because finding true love isn't just about finding the right person. It's about knowing how to recognize them and not walking away when you do. Best and rest.